I'd say don't all jump at once.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Brooke, okay, celebrities who've played significant roles in your story. Okay, all right. Yeah, we'll just kind of like, let's collect some of these and then we can sit down and start really talking about them. Denise, do you want to share?
Yeah, I was just going to enter it in the chat, but it's about privacy, and I'm sure a lot of that will come up. How do we respect others' privacy, even and do we need permission? You know, what are the rules around it? And even if they do give us permission to share their name or if we want to use a pseudonym to protect a certain person, maybe, you know, it's our point of view, it's our narrative, and how does that impact or affect them? So that I caution, and I'm not sure about it.
Great. Okay, we'll definitely talk about that for sure. Lisa says, client liability issues regarding previous employers or managers. Lisa, do you want to hop on and just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. It's just somebody who's writing about some past events in their employment where there were just sort of certain types of abuse or perception of certain types of abuse. And so how would they go about sort of, you know, even if they say, you know, my manager at the time, without naming anyone, if, you know, it was at XYZ company and this person has a public bio where we know that that's where they worked, how would do they need to consult a lawyer? What, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay, good question. Good.
Marilyn also has her hand raised.
Yeah, Marilyn.
Hi, I was typing in the chat. I don't do the chat so well, so I'll just share.
That's okay.
One of the things that's been really hard in my memoir, it's been that writing at the heart of it is an incident between my mother and I that we have never talked about. It's something that happened a long time ago. And it's something that because of my own, what I know as my narrator's internal obstacle, I've kept real silent about it. And I've also used it as a way to keep her at a distance. So it's always been
Betty, be quiet.
Disconcerting to me to write about it with that, because I don't want to throw my mother under the bus. I want a relationship with her. And so I was visiting with her this past week, and our lives have changed because my father has recently passed, and it's just a different dynamic. And I made a decision to talk to her about it. And we actually had this conversation that I'm still kind of landing from it. She was very receptive. She was very open and apologetic. And I was very open about how it had affected me. And it was a real healing. It was a real healing time, I think, for both of us. And so I guess the fear will be less going forward for me, because now it's out in the open, and we know, she knows, I know, you know, it's not so much in hiding. So yeah.
Personally, Matt.
Well, Stephen, can we do raise hand? Yeah. Go ahead, Stephen.
I totally agree that talking about these things at a proper time is a good time, that we need to come clean with everybody. And the more open you are with your parents, the better it is. I took care of my parents for 17 years. And it just got easier and easier. And no longer was their son, I was their friend. So I think it's you can feel your way through the uh, 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 roadblocks, but I would certainly encourage you to. Especially since you said that you had had a discussion this weekend. And so you've already broken the ice. Just feeling like they're your friends is rather than your parents. They don't want to give that up. They'll never actually give that up. But if you start treating them like a friend, perhaps you can.
Yeah,
I think
so-
Thank you.
yeah, sorry, I see
Yeah.
another, Marilyn, did you have more to add before we go?
Well, I was just going to say that the thing for me in terms of my memoir and bringing it back to the memoir is that I had mentioned in our last meeting that I was wondering if maybe I was still kind of figuring things out and hadn't quite finished living the arc. And now it's very clear to me that that's the ending, because it's the closing to the beginning. And it's also helping me see more clearly. I'm not super there yet, but almost what the point of the memoir is. It's just given me, so I just share that to say that, sometimes there is still another little thing that has to happen in life. I think, Jenny Nash's recent newsletter, when she was talking about Suzette's memoir and your process, Suzette, have you seen that? It resonated with me so much. Is it going to be about this, or is it about this? Like what that point is, and how you as a memoirist were still kind of working through that in life. And that spoke very deeply to me. And the last thing I'll say is I love your new title, Suzette.
Oh, thank you.
love
Thank you.
it.
Thank you, Marilyn.
If you want to share how you came to that at some point, I would love to.
Yeah, yeah. So Terry,
Yes, so I come from a family where we always talk everything out. It's just kind of a gift that I thought everyone did, but I have learned that not a lot of people don't. But I also think that for me, with my my memoir, and grief, everyone experiences grief in a different way, and so I have to honor that, I think. And I also would like, especially my daughters, to know exactly what's going to come out, and there would be no surprises. I just want them to be able to have their input, because coming from a family of four other siblings, I had four siblings. I have learned that we remember things differently. We remember the events of our family. We remember those things differently. And I love their input, my brother and sister. There are three of us left. And it's interesting, their perceptions of things. And I'm the oldest, so I can remember things that I know they can't, because they were babies when I remember them. And so they get that backstory. Like my brother just got his backstory of different funny things that happened when he was born, because I'm 4 years older than him. So anyway, for me, that's what I have to do. Anyone that's in it, I need to let them know. And we talked about that with, like deceased people in my past. And
yeah, absolutely.
so
Madeline, how about you?
Well, I'm going to take it in a totally different direction here, because for me, I'm not worried about how other people are going to react or feel about things. I'm the dangers for me in terms of what I'm fearing is just getting mired in a lot of old pain that I don't really want to dig into.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can speak to that, Suzette, for sure.
Yeah, no, I can. And so, Madeline, have you thought about how you might manage that? Do you have any strategies for that?
Well, I've been trying to write this for 30 years and or more. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it also manifests itself, I think, in my not being able to remember a lot of things. And so that also makes it harder. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So I think that I want to circle back to some of the things that we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, and then definitely want to come back to Madeline's, because I think that's a whole, like, I see this as we have sort of two categories. We have concerns about writing about other people, and I want to break that down into a couple of different categories. And then we have concerns kind of for ourself, the writing, either the re-traumatizing ourselves by bringing up old memories of things that are really hard, the fear of putting our story out into the world, that just the vulnerability of sharing some really hard things. So I think that let's maybe spend a little time on that first part about writing about other people, and then we can transition to writing about our kind of our own stuff and what it does to us. I think what's come up in a little bit of conversation we've had so far is both what are the sort of ethical or moral responsibilities we have toward other people that we're writing about, whether they are friends and family members or just other people out in the world. I believe Brooke said something about, can you mute yourself, Deborah? Brooke said something about writing about famous people. She had some famous people in her, I don't know if she's still on the call. Is she still on the call? And yeah, she is. And yeah, there you go, Brooke. Sorry if you're eating, you can go off camera if you want. I just wanted to make sure. And then a couple of people mentioned sort of legal considerations. Lisa mentioned that for a client, and I think it was also alluded to a couple of other people. So Barbara or Suzanne, do you want to weigh in on any of that? I have definitely things I can share, but I don't want to be the one doing all the talking.
I wanted to weigh in a little bit about the question that both Roberta and Christina put here. Roberta asked about whether or not to warn family members in advance or just write about them and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, personally, I think that depends on the relationship. It can certainly be quite shocking for someone, I think, to read something about themselves that they had no idea they'd had that impact on someone. That is certainly a personal choice. It depends on the relationship that you have and the risks that you want to take with that relationship. I don't think any of us can sort of say, yes, you absolutely have to talk to them, or let the chips lie. It's a personal choice. But that also ties in a bit with being concerned about the reaction, which Christina asked about, and fictionalizing or changing details. And I think with loved ones, and maybe this is true with famous people as well, there's a question of telling the story without putting judgment on it. I like to guide clients to color that. I read something recently in a piece about writing memoir, where it's like, instead of saying, grandpa was a drunk, say grandpa always had a six-pack under his, car seat or whatever. Let it, by giving the details, you can leave the reader to make their own judgments, because I think that's where people might be offended if they're reading it. You know, there's a way to present your writing, the way you tell the story or show the story as opposed to telling it. And the last thing I'll add there, I work a lot with clients in the corporate world who use stories to illustrate a point, but they have client confidentiality. In that case, there's a disclaimer of sorts in the beginning of the book that the stories are true, but the details have been changed to protect, you know, their client confidentiality. And that might mean, you know, changing gender, changing names, obviously, the industry that they're in, really, and sometimes it's a composite. I don't know that you can do that in the context of straightforward memoir. I mean, that it's your story. I have worked with clients who have changed names, but typically not fictionalized it. I mean, then it becomes something else. It's no longer memoir. It's
I think that what you'll see if you start, you know, paying attention to this in the memoirs that you're reading, virtually all of them will have some kind of author's note at the very beginning, which will be kind of like a variation on these are my memories. Other people may remember these same events differently. And then any other sort of disclaimers about, you know, some names have been changed, some identifying details have been changed. I would agree with what you just said, Barbara. I think that it's unusual, but not impossible. I know of some examples of memoir that have used, say, composite characters. For example, Gina Frangello's Blow Your House Down. She used a composite character for a best friend that plays a big role in the memoir. And she, you know, she made that decision for multiple reasons, and she lets you know about that. So, I mean, in that sort of in the author's note. So with memoir, you are in that space of creative nonfiction. So you have flexibility to do things like changing some details, and you can't make, forgive my language, you can't make shit up. I mean, you can't do that. Like, you can't create a conversation that never happened, you know, like you, of course, the dialogue that you're sharing on the page is not word for word, because none of us walks around with a tape recorder and, you know, records conversation. But I think as long as you are being clear with your reader about what you're doing. I mean, another common thing is to compress events, or even sometimes change the order of events for the sake of the narrative flow. And that's also something that you would put in the author's note, that you've done that. So you want your reader to trust you. So if you're doing something like a composite character, that's something that you should share. But the whole idea now, you know, Suzanne Dunlap also, obviously, she coaches memoir and many other things, but she's a historical fiction writer. And I'm wondering if some of these issues come up. I mean, we don't need to go on a big rabbit trail for historical fiction, but do some of these same issues come up about, because you're in historical fiction, you're writing about real life people. How do you handle that?
Again, it really depends on who you're writing about. You know, if you're writing a recent past, there's a lot of stuff in the 50s now that has people who are, some of them even still alive, like me. But, and in that case, I think you really have to be a little careful, because if you're going to name the people, if it's historical, but once you get back to, you know, the 18th century or something, it sort of doesn't matter. What you risk is actually getting angry comments from other historical people who think they know better than you do. But there's not a problem of people actually there kind of, but it's still, in fact, on Thursday, I have a blog post coming up on Jane Friedman's site, which is about exactly this, which is, how historical fiction, how memoirists can learn from historical fiction authors, things about story, plot, character, all that sort of thing. So that was a really good question, but we don't have the same problems, the same potential sensitive issues, I don't think. There could be legal issues if you write something about somebody famous who's still alive or whose descendants are still alive. But it's not the same.
Yeah, so just, to sort of maybe finish this part of the conversation, although, we can reopen it, is in terms of sort of the moral and let's put the legal to the side for a moment, but the moral and ethical responsibility we have about writing about other people. I think what I'm gathering from the conversation and what I would agree with is that this is largely it's largely an individual choice. It's, what is the relationship that you have with these people? How will you writing about them impact your relationship? Do you want to share? Do you want to talk to them ahead of time? Mary Karr, who is, has written 3 best-selling memoirs, says that she always talks to the people ahead of time. Other writers don't talk to the, Anne Lamott also says pretty much the opposite. If people wanted me to write nice things about them, they should have treated me better. I mean, that's what Anne Lamott says, right? And so I think you have to kind of do what feels right for you. I mean, one piece of advice I would have is that if it's a particularly tricky situation or it feels really hard, you might want to consider not talking to the person about it at the very beginning, because maybe there's a scene that you are just like really nervous about it, and that scene might not make it to a later draft, and then you've had to have this conversation that like you didn't really have to have. So I think that you really have to do what's right for you. I'll give you an example. I don't think I said this the last, because I know we kind of touched on some of this the last time. But so I have 2 sons, and one of my sons was diagnosed with ADHD when he was in kindergarten, and it's relevant to the story. I mean, it's pretty central to my story, but he's my son, and I didn't want to expose something about him. I mean, he's now in his early 30s. If it wasn't something that he wanted to have out in the world, and if he said no, I would have had to find a way to tell the story without sharing that piece of information. And so obviously my relationship with him was more important than sharing a piece of information about him that is pretty important to my story. But could I have found a way to work around that? Yes, I would have had to do that. So you've got that sort of, what's your relationship like? Is this an ongoing relationship that you care about, that matters to you? And you have to just do what feels right for you. Does anyone want to say anything more about that before I kind of shift into talking about some of the legal stuff?
Or we will come back to Madeline's question about digging down for yourself, right? Madeline was talking when she spoke. She was talking about, her fear is that she's going to revisit some things that are very upsetting in her own life. So, yeah.
Yeah. We'll kind of talk about that in the second part when we're digging up, when we're talking about our own stuff. Yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about the legal side, about writing about other people. Now, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this because I was a lawyer in a former life, although I didn't practice this kind of law. So I'm very careful about, I don't want to give legal advice and, and all of those things, all the disclaimers, right? One thing I would say is if you're writing, period, but also if you're writing memoir, this is a great book. It's called Law and Authors, a Legal Handbook for Writers. And it really goes through everything that you would possibly want to know about it's got stuff about contracts, it's got stuff about copyright, it's got stuff about all of these things, writing about real people. So it's a great resource. So first of all, I would say get this book. It's worth the whatever it was, the $20 or so that this costs. Barbara, do you have anything you want to share about legalities, things that you've worked on with your clients or not? I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. The only time there have been potential legalities, I haven't had anyone who's had any problems. The only potential, again, is if you've got clients and there's confidentiality with that. I believe it's the Authors Guild that has a service where you can buy a sort of liability insurance. They have a legal staff that reviews the manuscript and sort of evaluates where there might be risk. And then there's the opportunity, I guess, to buy an insurance policy, sort of like a malpractice for writers or, liability from them. So that I haven't personally used that, but I have worked with people who have contracted with them. So that's a source for people who are really concerned, especially if you're in, I think it was Brooke who said that there are celebrities in her story. That might be something to consider. Because in these cases, you can speak to this, as you said, Suzette, this wasn't your field. You need someone who's going to look at libel and defamation and much like you might need a copyright lawyer for if you're citing works from someplace else. That it's a matter of identifying the right attorney that you need for the potential risk that you're evaluating.
Yeah, and so what I would say is just like very high level, because I don't want people to sort of freak out. So very high level is anybody can sue anybody for anything, right? I mean, this is, let's just put it, whether, so if the question is, could I get sued for doing this? Well, anybody could get, there are frivolous lawsuits that happen every day in this country about all kinds of things. Is this a common thing that happens for memoir writers? No, it is not a common thing that happens for memoir writers. So I want to put your mind at ease. I think if you have, I think there definitely are going to be certain special circumstances that might be the wise thing to do to seek legal counsel if your publisher doesn't provide that. In my case, I'm publishing with a university press. I didn't really have any legal concerns. But I did ask my publisher, do you do a legal review? And no, they don't, because they're a small university press. They don't have, lawyers to go through so I made the decision that I was comfortable with, there really is only one person in my memoir that I'm a little worried about. And I don't, knowing her, I'm not really worried that I'm going to get sued. You know, I'm worried that there might be
Yeah.
some hard
Den-
feelings, but yeah,
Denise has
Denise.
her hand up. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yes, Denise.
I think you're kind of answering the question as you're going along. I'm just thinking about, you know, self-publishing versus traditional publishing when it's out globally to the world where anybody can have access to your book. And if you have a really renowned memoir that, you know, becomes very popular as such, versus self-publishing, like obviously the risk would be less. And are there any differences, I guess, is the question in your mind?
I mean, you know, once your book is published, it's published, and it doesn't really matter whether it was, you know, self-published, hybrid published, or published through a traditional press. I mean, what did you want to say something, Suzanne?
Yeah, I was just going to say
Yeah.
the only difference, and I think that's what you were getting at, Denise, is that, you know, your self-published memoir may not have the same reach, may not get to as many people as if you go to HarperCollins or something and they publish it. They, you know, it'll be more widely, more publicized, more widely available. That was all. And I'm not sure it really makes any difference, because if somebody, you know, they're going to be looking for your memoir anyway, if it's someone you know. So, you know.
But if you're publishing through HarperCollins, the advantage you have is their lawyers will do a legal review, and so you will have that. You know, this is all about assessing risk, right? All of us have different, you know, whether we're talking about the moral or ethical or the legal, it's all about assessing risk, and we all have different levels of risk tolerance, right? And we all have to also think about what, you know, what's more, you know, what's more important to you. So does that help at all, Denise?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let's shift gears and talk about the subject that Madeline brought up, and that I think is also at least as important, which is writing. You know, this is the dangers of writing memoirs. So we've talked about the dangers about writing about real people, other people, and all those things, but the dangers of revisiting the past, of bringing up memories that about hard things, potentially re-traumatizing yourself. Let's just sit with that for a moment. And I mean, I feel like what I'm going to say to you, Madeline, is kind of obvious, but I don't have a better answer. I can share what it was like for me when I was writing my memoir. I was going back to the past. Now, I didn't have big T trauma in my past, so it was little T. So it might be very different for those of you who are writing, you know, about big T trauma. And but I definitely did re-experience. I felt like I was re-experiencing the events, and I think it's really important that when you are writing about the past, particularly trauma, is that you do have some kind of support team around you, whether it's a therapist, whether it's, you know, trusted friends. I mean, a lot of the work that we do as book coaches, you know, we're not therapists. We're not, at least, you know, I'm not. But a lot of what we do is we try to hold space for the writers that we're working with. And when it feels like it's too much, helping them to maybe back away a little bit. I don't know, Suzanne and Barbara, do you have anything to add to that?
I have a question on my intake form about how long someone's been thinking about the idea. That is partly for this, partly for other reasons, because sometimes people will begin writing memoir too soon. And I think it's hard to write through something when you haven't had that distance to metabolize it. But I agree in terms of, you know, that you may have years and it's just the act of reliving it, because through writing it, there is, to get that emotion on the page, there is a certain amount of reliving the situation that necessarily happens. And there, I would second what you said, Suzette, having a support system, whether that's a book coach, a therapist, a good friend, whoever that is, that person who can reassure you that you're not really, you know, you've moved on from that. And I can't help but think of perhaps like actors who draw on something from their own past to tap into an emotion. It's sort of, if you can in some way tap into that emotion but not stay there, because that's going to make the story real, but it can certainly be painful to do that.
And yes, but here's the paradox about all of this, I think, is that it's important to go there because you have to be honest to your readers. And the more vulnerable you are on the page, the more your memoir probably has a chance of resonating with readers and helping them, if that's what your goal is for your memoir. And so it is a problem, I think, if you're writing about something, whether it's big T or small t, and you revisit it, maybe also reminding yourself why you're doing that, you know, what it is that makes you feel like you have to go there, that you have to say those things, and how it's going to be worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I was just about to say something similar, Suzanne. I mean, the paradox is that when we're writing memoir, we do want to get back into that space because we want to get that emotion on the page. We want to, you know, we have the perspective, yes, that this is something that happened in the past, and we know that how we're going to present it, how we're going to shape it, but we are the character, we're the protagonists of the story. And if we don't allow ourselves to go there a certain amount, to revisit those moments and those scenes, we're not going to write very alive and compelling scenes that the reader's going to connect with. You know, one of Terry's one of my clients, and we've been working together. And you know, Terry, do you mind if I just share a little bit about, or you know, maybe you can just share a little bit about, you know, she's been revisiting, writing about grief and about her husband who passed away in 2014, and you know, going back to some of those scenes, like how has that felt for you? How have you managed that?
Well, it definitely has scratched up a lot of pain again, but I know that I have to go through it, and I've been through it, so it doesn't last as long. But I've found that when I'm reading my journals and transcribing things and I really want to feel that, because if I am crying, I'm hoping my reader will cry. And when I'm laughing, I'm hoping my reader will laugh. And I am juxtapositioning this with a friend who's just lost her husband, as Suzette knows, about 10, 11 months ago. And so I go right to those journals in my transcription and reading. And lo and behold, she is almost parallel with where I was. It's just uncanny. And so I tell her, our last conversation, she said, I'm feeling better. You know, she knows it's not just going to happen that quickly, but I was feeling better at 10. So, and if you have anything else to add from what your perceptions were, it's fine.
No. I mean, you know, there sometimes when we're on a call, Terry will be like, "Yeah, I really felt this," and that, you know, I'm like, "Good," you know, but it's both and. You've got to allow yourself to feel it, and you have to have some sort of container, boundaries, or support system to make sure that you're not. It doesn't. We don't want it to re-traumatize you, for sure. Denise, did you have another question, or was that was your hand just up from before?
No, no, it's not another question. It's
Okay,
just to
okay,
share
okay.
some of my,
Yeah.
my own experience. So, like Madeline, for years now, I've been saying, sorry about the knocking in the background. I
Okay,
hope it's
yeah.
not too disruptive. I've been wanting to write this book for 20 years. So my memoir is basically extrapolation of journals that I've kept for 20 years, which is invaluable. But the material is so raw because now it's not just about extrapolating it from memory, it's right there on the page. So everything I'm feeling, everything I'm expressing at the moment in time when it's happening, the abuse or the loss of my own husband, is very real. But having said that, I have had years of experience with therapy, and I have a toolbox full of tools. And I think it's really being listening to self. You really have to listen to yourself. And yes, it is a healing a healing in itself. But I came across a little piece and I thought I'd share it. And my therapist had said to me, you know, because I think that probably everyone here, we all have a certain drive to want to even write a memoir, right? We're people that probably push hard, and we've been through a lot of hard experiences and joyful experiences. But in my writing, you know, that my therapist said, Denise, when things get too tough, like take it in blocks. And I actually had to do that while I was writing. I'm in Costa Rica on a sabbatical to write. And when the emotions would start to stir too much and I was starting to feel a little bit like edgy, and I'm like, oh, I don't feel, you know, and I just put it aside. So do a block of whatever a block is to you, 2-3 hours, 3-4 hours, take a break, come back, or don't go back to it. That helps me to shift, or I'll change the scene. Instead of going into the abuse piece now, I'm going to go into another thing that I want to talk about, so that it helps me to keep some balance. But in the end, for me, it's really about listening to self and knowing my own triggers, because if I don't know myself well enough, I'm going to spiral, and I have spiraled, and I don't want to go there anymore, to the depths of that. So that's just something I wanted to share to give you.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you, Denise. So we have a few minutes left. Is there anyone else that would like to share something? And I want to, kind of give people a chance for a final word, and then we'll just spend a couple of minutes talking about mainly memoir. Stephen.
Like I said in my message to you, when do you know when you've overshared too much?
Great question. Well, again, I think that is going to be both a personal decision.
Most of it's about me.
Yeah. That's going to be it's a personal decision about, how much you want to share of your own story. I think that how I would answer that question is twofold. One is, what's the deeper story you're trying to tell? Okay, so that's the work that Barbara, Suzanne, and I do with every writer we work with. At the very beginning, we talk about what's your deep why for writing, what have you really come to the page to say, and really, what is your story really about? So once you've got a handle on that, then it will become more clear about what details you need to share that what we say will serve the story. And so the details you're sharing should serve the story. They should move the story along and be important. And I think that oversharing is problematic, both for, for you potentially just having that out in the world, but it's also not helpful for your reader, because your job as the writer is to curate the details that you're sharing. And when you share just all the things, first of all, depending on what it is you're sharing, you risk potentially traumatizing your reader unnecessarily, and you're also making it really difficult for your reader to understand what it is that they should be paying attention to. So I mean, that's the best way I can answer that, but that's a great question. Brooke, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly, there was something in the chat about how do you deal with other people's reactions, and me posting on Instagram, I've been dealing with people's reactions. It's very liberating for me. And also there's that piece of like managing what stuff is mine and what stuff is theirs to like manage, I guess would be the word that I would use. Anyway, it's painful, and you lose friends, and like,
yeah, I mean, this is, part of the danger is you put out your truth, your story, and some people, whether it's about them or not, just depending on what your story's about, you're going to offend people. There is just no doubt about that. And that is part of the risk of putting your story out into the world. And so you have to make that's also coming back to your deep why of like, why am I writing this? What is the impact that I really want to make? And really getting clear on that and coming back to that when it feels really hard, when you're getting, those negative comments out in the world. We've had some other things in the chat, which are great. I wish we had more time, but I think we probably need to sort of transition. Do we know what our next topic is? Barbara, Suzanne, yes. You're muted.
I think
You're
it's
muted,
about
Suzanne.
structure.
Yeah, I think it's structure
Yeah.
and shape in memoir. It's going to be more of a craft kind of talk
Mhm.
rather than a kind psychological, emotional, theoretical talk.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
which, and basically, I mean, with memoir, with anything really, but I think especially with memoir, structure is so important, because that's how you build the container for whatever that story is that you're wanting to tell. So
Are you talking about the beginning and the end and then creating the story in the middle?
no, that's just a basic thing. What we're talking about, there are lots of different ways to structure a memoir, and I can't go into them now because we're going to talk about them next time, and we only have a few minutes. But
Sure.
I'd love it if you all came to the next thing.
Webinar.
Webinar, sorry.
Yeah.
I just am not finding words
know.
today.
Yeah. And Christina, you had a great question in the chat, and about fictionalizing versus memoir, and I'd love to respond to you, and we will respond to you. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about that today, and maybe we'll write a blog post about that. I think that's a great. So yes, the next webinar, they're always on the third Tuesday of the month.
It's the 18th of April.
The 18th of April,
Yes,
same
and I have my
time.
slide. Hang on a second here.
Yes.
Okay. Except the March 21st is where we are now, but it's April 18th.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I had them the wrong way
Okay.
around. Look,
Oh,
April
okay.
18th is
Okay.
setting. They're both about structure and about the writing craft, But April 18th is setting boundaries. May 16th is creating structure and shape. And
Okay.
yeah, we'd love to have you on the interest list as well. So that's it's easy to find us to get on it on our website. There's links all over the place. Or if you're really tech savvy and you have your phone handy, you can just take a look, point it at this QR code.
And do we have a slide for the mainly memoir retreat, or do you want to
No.
share anything about that? Okay, we don't have.
No, I didn't make a slide for that. I mean,
right,
go to
well,
our
so-
website. Yeah.
Yes, it's mainly with an E, mainlymemoir.com. And it is a retreat for women memoir writers, a small group retreat. There's only going to be 12 writers, and there's going to be 3 coaches, and it's going to be amazing. And it's be in a luxury hotel in historic Biddeford, Maine. And we'd love to have you. And if anyone has any, more specific questions about that, you can just reach out, and we're happy to hop on a call with you to talk to you about it. So thank you all for being here, and such great conversation and great questions. And I hope you'll come back next month. All right.
Yes, I
Thank
think so. Yeah.
Everyone.
All
Thank you.
right. Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Thank you much. Have a nice evening.
You too.